Hi, I'm Althea. I came home from duty on Christmas Eve, thinking I'd surprise Grandma with a hug and a cup of cocoa. Instead, I found her shivering on the porch, 31 degrees, lips blue, while inside, my family was laughing, eating turkey, drinking champagne by the fire. When I asked why, they said, "She likes the porch." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just neglect, it was a story that had been rewriting itself for years, erasing her. And maybe me too. What kind of family forgets the woman who raised them? And what happens when the one person they pushed out pushes back? It was just past 6 in the evening when I pulled up at the corner of Maple and 3rd, the tires of my cruiser crunching softly over the freshly fallen snow. The sky had already turned a soft indigo, and the holiday lights lining every porch in the neighborhood cast a warm, flickering glow. I cut the engine and let the silence settle. No radio chatter, no hum of static, just my heartbeat, steady and alert, and the familiar creak of the old leather seat as I stepped out into the chill. I didn't park in the driveway. I wanted to surprise her, Grandma. That was the whole point of coming back early. I hadn't told anyone at the precinct either, just handed in my paperwork, grabbed my bag, and said I was done for the night. Christmas Eve, and for the first time in years, I had no shift, no deployment, no excuse, just a plan. Come home, show up unannounced, and make her laugh like she used to when I was still the little girl who believed porches were magical and rocking chairs were thrones. I tucked my gloved hands into my coat and crossed the familiar yard. My boots sank into the snow with a satisfying crunch. The house hadn't changed. Not much, anyway. The shutters were still painted that same off-white that flaked a little more each year. The wreath on the door was new. Clean, pristine, expensive-looking. And through the frosted windows, I could already see silhouettes moving, Dad's broad shoulders, Mom's overdone hair glinting in the light, Callista's glass raised in mid-toast. The house radiated warmth. It poured out through the curtains and the cracks of the window frames like cinnamon and nutmeg, the kind of holiday glow you see in magazines or movie scenes, the kind that said, "Everything is perfect here." And then I saw her. On the porch, she was curled into herself on the swing, her hands trembling in her lap, the house lights casting long shadows over her paper-thin skin. She wore a thin, floral cardigan, one I remembered from years ago, and a pair of old house slippers. No coat, no blanket, just her, exposed to the wind slicing through the eaves. I froze. The cold hit me a second later, but not in the way it usually does. It wasn't just the air, it was the sight of her like that. Shrunken, blue-lipped, eyes closed but not asleep. "Grandma?" I whispered, stepping closer, almost afraid she wouldn't respond. Her eyes fluttered open slowly. It took her a second to recognize me, but when she did, her face cracked into the softest smile. "Annie," she breathed, her voice a brittle thread. "You came." I knelt in front of her without thinking, unzipping my coat, wrapping it around her body. My own body heat surged toward her, but she was like ice. "What are you doing out here?" My voice caught. "Why didn't anyone bring you in?" She shook her head gently. "They said I wanted air." She didn't sound angry, just tired. So tired. I looked over my shoulder at the house. Through the glass, I saw Callista laughing at something Gideon said. My father was carving the turkey. My mother stood in front of the fireplace, adjusting the angle of a stocking that didn't belong to Grandma. I stood up slowly, supporting Grandma's weight with both arms. She was lighter than I remembered, too light. As I held her, something broke in my chest. I carried her to the door and knocked 3 times. It took a few seconds, but then the door opened, just a crack. My mother peeked through. Her expression flickered from surprise to annoyance in less than a second. "Althea," she said, voice bright but brittle. "You should have called." I stared at her. "She was on the porch," I said evenly. "She likes the porch," she replied, eyes sliding past me. "It's peaceful for her." "She's freezing," I snapped. "She insisted," Mom said with a shrug. "We offered." Behind her, Dad appeared, face unreadable. "What's the problem?" he asked. I didn't answer. I looked back at Grandma. Her lips were blue, her eyes drooped. I looked at my mother again. "You left her out here," Mom sighed. Don't be dramatic. I didn't respond. I stepped back, cradled Grandma tighter, and shifted my grip. Then, with one swift motion, I slammed my shoulder into the door. The latch gave, and the door flew open. Inside, the room fell silent. Callista's champagne glass froze mid-air. Gideon's carving knife paused. The fire cracked. I stepped inside and let my badge glint in the firelight. I suggest you all sit down, I said, my voice cold, deliberate. They didn't move. I let the silence stretch until it was unbearable. Then I took another step forward, Grandma still in my arms, her head resting against my shoulder like it used to when I was little and scared of storms. My father blinked first. What's going on? He demanded. I stared at him, then at the rest of them. My mother looked embarrassed. Callista looked annoyed. Gideon looked confused. No one looked ashamed. She was outside in 31-degree weather, I said, slow and measured. No coat, no blanket. Just left there. She asked to sit out, Callista said quickly. She asked? In slippers? In a summer sweater? I turned toward her. And none of you thought to check if she changed her mind? Vera straightened. We're not going to let you come in here and… I cut her off with a single look. I'm not here for your permission. Another beat of silence. Then I moved to the fireplace and gently lowered Grandma into the nearest chair. The warmth washed over her, and she let out a small sigh of relief. Her eyes met mine. Annie? I've got it, I said. I turned back to them. You think this is okay? That because it's the holidays, you get to pretend she's not freezing to death on your front porch? Gideon stepped forward. No one meant any harm. That doesn't matter. I saw it then. How uncomfortable they all looked now that the illusion was cracking. How much effort they had put into decorating, hosting, smiling, only to ignore the woman who raised us all. I took another step forward. She's not your burden, I said, voice steady. She's your mother, and she's not invisible. No one replied. I looked around the room one last time and felt it, like a storm had just rolled in. And I was the thunder. The room didn't react right away. My words still hung there, heavier than the smoke rising from the fireplace. Grandma coughed again, just once, but it was enough to break the trance. I moved her gently to the armchair near the fire, the same one Dad always claimed on football Sundays. Tonight, it became her throne. The warmth hit her skin like a silent apology the house wasn't brave enough to offer out loud. I straightened slowly, still facing them. They stood frozen like mannequins in a department store window, Callista with her champagne halfway to her lips, Mom with one hand on her hip and the other still clutching a decorative napkin, and Dad, jaw tight, unmoved. You can't just storm in here, Dad said finally. His voice was even, clipped. I blinked. I didn't storm. I walked, with your mother in my arms, because she was shaking on the porch like a forgotten dog. He stepped forward a bit. This is our home, Althea. We don't need you barging in like you're the sheriff of the family. I didn't flinch. Maybe you should have thought about that before you turned your back on the woman who raised you. Callista scoffed. Why do you always do this? She said, turning toward Mom, as if they were back in their clique of two. Everything has to be some dramatic scene with her. This isn't about me, I said flatly, looking at Callista. It's about her, the woman sitting in that chair, the one you left out in 31 degrees. She said she wanted some air, Mom replied casually, like we were discussing tea preferences. She's 86, I snapped. Her blood pressure drops if the thermostat dips below 70. Maybe she should have said something, Dad muttered. I couldn't believe it. The denial, the self-preservation, the rewrites of truth already forming in their mouths. I glanced at Grandma, who was watching the flames with a dazed calm, as if she was already somewhere else in her mind. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. That would have been too easy for them, too familiar. The crazy one acting out again. Instead, I walked over to the fireplace, adjusting Grandma's legs so she could warm her feet. As I moved toward the hearth, Dad stepped in front of me. You don't live here anymore, he said quietly. There it was. Not our house, not your home, just not mine. The words didn't sting like they used to. Maybe because I had already accepted that truth long ago. Or maybe because hearing it confirmed what I'd felt every time they left me out of group texts, family dinners, gift exchanges, every moment they said without saying, "You don't belong here." "It's okay, honey," Grandma said softly behind me. I turned and met her eyes. She still wore that gentle look, the one that told me she loved me without needing to say a word, but it also held a kind of defeat, like she'd made peace with being pushed aside. I wasn't there yet, and I didn't plan to be. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, turning back to Dad. "You can block the hallway, but you can't erase what you've done." "You're overreacting," Mom chimed in, folding her arms. I laughed, not from humor, but from something sharper. Overreacting. She could have died out there. You don't get to call this an overreaction. You're just uncomfortable because I finally called it out loud. Dad looked ready to speak, but I held up a hand. "No, you've all said enough over the years." And just like that, I was back in that high school auditorium. Family awards night. I'd gotten a scholarship, full ride. I sat in the front row, clutching the certificate, waiting for the clap, the smile, the maybe proud nod, but none of them looked at me. All eyes were on Callista, who was being crowned prom queen 2 sections over. Later that night, the fridge was covered in congratulatory notes for her. My acceptance letter, still sealed, never opened. "You were always different," Mom had said once. Not with love, with something else. Pity, maybe, or disappointment. I blinked the memory away, focusing instead on the present, on the woman by the fire, and the people who had turned her into a background prop. I could feel the urge building again, rage, sadness, whatever name you wanted to slap on the fire brewing in my gut. I wanted to throw something. Scream. Break their expensive centerpiece on the dining table, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped back into the center of the room and looked at each of them, one by one. Callista, with her perfect hair and matching earrings. Gideon, ever silent, pretending neutrality was the same as innocence. Dad, hiding behind principles he never lived by. And Mom, holding on to decorum like it was the last thread keeping her dignity stitched together. "I'm staying right here," I said, my voice low but firm. "Because she shouldn't be out there. And if none of you can say that out loud, then I'll say it for all of us." No one responded. The room, warm as it was, felt colder than the snow outside. Then Grandma coughed, just once. It wasn't loud, but it sliced through the air like a siren. I turned to the wall and walked over to the thermostat. "It's 31 degrees outside," I said quietly. Then I turned around, facing them again, louder now, clearer. "And you left her out there." For a moment, I thought someone might say something, anything, but the room stayed eerily still. The only movement came from the fire, its flames dancing against the glass screen, completely unaware of the war simmering around it. I sat down beside Grandma in the same armchair I'd carried her to earlier, my coat still wrapped snug around her. She didn't speak, but she reached for my hand, her fingers barely warm. I squeezed gently, not out of comfort, but to tell her, without words, that I wasn't moving. Not tonight, not anymore. The others tried to settle back into the illusion. Callista whispered something to Gideon and refilled her glass. Dad walked to the couch, picked up the remote, and turned the volume up on the TV. Just a little too loud. Like background noise could drown out guilt. Grandma let her eyes drift to the screen. Holiday music played over old home videos, grainy footage from decades ago. The kind of thing that makes people nostalgic, makes them believe their past was kinder than it really was. I almost looked away. Until I saw myself. I was maybe 9, wearing a red sweater 2 sizes too big, baking cookies in the kitchen with Grandma. I remembered the flour on her nose, how she let me lick the spoon even though Mom would have lectured her for it. The clip only lasted a few seconds, but it wasn't the image that got me. It was the caption in white letters across the bottom. Callista and Grandma, 1999. I blinked. What? I stared harder. That was me, not Callista, not even close. But there it was, my memory, my moment, rewritten in real time right in front of my face. They had taken me out of my own childhood and handed it to her. Seriously? I said aloud, unable to stop myself. No one answered. Or maybe they didn't hear me over the sound of sleigh bells and fake laughter on the screen. I leaned forward and turned off the TV. The room fell silent again. "Oh, I'm in that video," I said, looking at Mom. "That's me, not Callista." She blinked slowly, like she was processing it for the first time. "Are you sure?" It was such a ridiculous question, I actually laughed. "Yes, I'm sure. I was there." "Maybe we mislabeled it," she said, brushing invisible crumbs from her blouse. "You didn't mislabel it," I said. "You replaced me." Callista rolled her eyes. "You're making this into a thing it's not." "No," I said. "I'm finally calling it what it is." Grandma squeezed my hand again. Her gaze didn't shift from the fire, but her grip said she understood. She always understood. I stood up slowly and turned toward the mantel. The stockings hung in their usual places. Dad's with the sports logo, Mom's with embroidered snowflakes, Callista's in shimmering gold, Gideon's next to hers. Even the dog had one, but there was no stocking for Grandma. I scanned the entire mantel again just to be sure. "Where's hers?" I asked aloud, looking directly at Mom. She turned toward the fireplace, then back to me with the same calm tone she used when telling servers her salad had too much dressing. "She hasn't asked for one in years," she said. I stared at her, stunned. "She has to ask to be included now?" "No," she said, voice gentle. "I just assumed she didn't care." I pointed to the dog's stocking. "And the dog cares?" That made Callista laugh, a quick brittle sound. I stepped closer to the mantel, still holding Grandma's hand. "She doesn't have to ask to be remembered." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence that followed said more than shouting ever could. I let go of Grandma's hand gently and walked over to the TV stand. My stocking was buried in a pile of unopened gift bags. I pulled it out, shook off a few pine needles, and walked back to the mantel. Then I hung it beside the others, leaving a space next to mine. "She's not invisible," I said, turning back toward them. "Not to me." No one moved. Dad cleared his throat. "Althea, let's not what?" I cut in. "Let's not point out the truth. Let's not say out loud what's been obvious for years." He hesitated, then fell quiet. I looked back at the fireplace. Grandma was resting again, eyes half closed. But I could see her lips twitch upward for a second. A faint smile, a flicker of being seen. I returned to my spot next to her and sat down. My hands trembled a little, but not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't new. None of it. Not the minimizing, not the gaslighting, not the erasure. They had been doing it since I was old enough to speak up. When I was in high school, I won a statewide essay contest. Big deal. They handed me a medal in front of the entire school assembly. That same night, Callista got a new car for always being responsible. The next morning, the essay ribbon was gone from the fridge, replaced by a photo of Callista and her keys. They never said they were proud of me. They said I was independent, that I didn't need praise. When I left for basic training, no one saw me off. No hugs, no signs, no airport drop-off. I called from the terminal. Mom said, "You always knew how to take care of yourself." That was their favorite compliment, their way of excusing neglect. Grandma had been the only one who ever checked in. She sent handwritten letters, even when arthritis made it hard to grip a pen. When I graduated from the academy, she was the only one who flew out. She said, "You wear that badge like a shield, but you've always had a warrior's heart." And now they'd left her in the cold like forgotten mail. I looked at her again, the flickering light from the fireplace painting her cheeks a warmer color. Her eyes opened slowly and met mine. "It's just the way it's always been," she whispered. I leaned closer, brushing her wispy hair back from her face. "Then maybe it's time for that to change," I said. She smiled faintly. "You think they'll let you?" I gave her a look that said what I couldn't. I don't need their permission. After a few minutes, I stood up again. The tension in the room hadn't lessened. If anything, it had just sharpened, like everyone was waiting to see what I'd do next. I walked to the mantel, reached for my stocking, and adjusted it slightly. Then I picked up a second hook from the side drawer, the one we used when guests brought extra company. I clipped it into place and hung a plain red stocking beside mine. It didn't have a name embroidered on it, but it didn't need one. Everyone knew exactly who it was for. Nobody said a word after I spoke. The crackling fire seemed to fill every inch of the silence, hissing against the bricks like it was trying to warn someone. Maybe all of us. Vera didn't blink. She stood with her arms crossed like a queen at a trial she thought she'd already won. Callista glanced toward Dad, waiting for him to lead the next act. Gideon kept his eyes on the baseboards. He never did like looking at things too long when they were uncomfortable. No one moved toward Grandma. No one offered her water, or comfort, or the dignity of acknowledgement. Instead, they started whispering again. Callista walked over, softening her voice to that tone she always used when she was about to throw something sharp. "You always find a way to make it about you." I turned slowly. "Excuse me?" She tucked her sleek hair behind her ear, gave a little shrug. "I mean, it's Christmas Eve. We're all trying to enjoy the night, and suddenly you show up uninvited, barging in like we're villains in some courtroom drama." "I didn't barge," I said. "I carried in the woman you left freezing on the porch." "We didn't leave her," Gideon chimed in from across the room. "She likes fresh air." "That wasn't fresh air," I snapped. "It was 31 degrees, and you all knew it." Callista raised her chin. "We've all been doing our part, Althea. You're not here to see that." "Doing your part?" I repeated, staring at her. "What exactly is your part, Callista? Posting brunch photos and letting Mom cash the checks I send for Grandma's care?" Gideon raised both hands in surrender. "Now hold on." "That's not fair." "No," I said, stepping forward. "What's not fair is pretending that leaving someone out in the cold is caregiving." Vera stepped between us. "That's enough." I looked at her, and something in me cracked. It wasn't the kind of break that sent tears or screams. It was quieter than that, more dangerous. "You don't live here anymore," she said, calm and cold. "You don't get to judge what happens in this house." She always said it like that. This house. As if it belonged to her name on the deed, her rules, her image. As if history, pain, or love didn't count unless she approved it. "You're right," I said. "I don't live here. But Grandma does, or did, until you turned her into porch furniture." Vera's face didn't move, but her fingers twitched against her hip. I could have stayed in that standoff longer, but I needed space. I needed air. Real air, not the kind that stung with hypocrisy. Without saying anything else, I turned down the hallway and slipped into the guest room, the one that used to be Grandma's. The door creaked softly behind me as I shut it. It smelled faintly of lavender, but stale, like it hadn't been aired out in months. The room was tidy, too tidy. Like a hotel setup someone checked once a week, just to say they had. The bed was made, the curtains drawn. There were no photos, no books, no signs of life. I sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed my temples, trying to gather my thoughts. Then I noticed the drawer on the bedside table was slightly open. I reached over and pulled it gently. Inside was a small rectangular box, still wrapped in the faded holiday paper I'd used 2 years ago. My handwriting on the label read, "To Grandma, with love. Stay warm this year." It hadn't even been opened. My fingers tightened around the edge of the paper as I pulled the package out. A quiet horror settled into my chest. I tore back the wrapping. Inside was the wool scarf I'd picked out myself, gray with a blue trim, soft and heavy, the kind of thing that wraps you in protection. I'd mailed it with a card. I remembered writing, "You mean more to me than you'll ever know." The card was still there, unread. She'd never gotten it. I stood slowly and walked back down the hall, scarf and card in hand, anger building with each step. They were all still where I left them, talking low, looking like a jury after deliberation. I didn't speak. I held up the scarf. "This was in the drawer," I said, my voice steady. "Still wrapped. Still sealed." No one answered. I held up the card next. "I sent this 2 years ago." "She never got it." Callista looked at Vera, then back at me. "Maybe she forgot it was there." "She didn't forget," I said. "You never gave it to her." Vera exhaled like she was exhausted. She didn't need more things cluttering up the room. "She needed warmth," I said. Not just from the fabric, from being remembered, being thought of, being loved. She was fine, Vera said. No, I said. She was invisible. You made her that way. The silence returned, but it felt heavier now, less of a shield and more of a weight pressing down on everyone. I walked to Grandma's chair. She was half asleep, her hands folded in her lap, fingers barely moving. I knelt beside her, unfolding the scarf. It's from me, I whispered. She opened her eyes slowly. You always send the softest ones. I'll make sure you get them from now on, I said, wrapping it around her shoulders, tucking it beneath the collar of her cardigan. She leaned into the warmth like a tired child, letting her cheek rest against the fabric. I stood again, turning to face them all. I won't let you freeze her anymore, I said. Not outside, not in here. Vera tilted her head. You act like we're monsters. You act like you're not, I replied. For once, no one had a snide comment ready. I stared at Vera, the woman who raised me, the woman who kept trying to raise herself above accountability. This ends tonight, I said, one way or another. The words barely left my mouth before the room began to fragment. No shouting, no outburst, just the quiet unraveling of people who suddenly realized the ground beneath them wasn't as solid as they believed. Doors closed down the hallway one by one. Chairs scraped softly as people moved away from the fire, from me, from Grandma. They didn't say they were leaving the conversation, but they didn't have to. I sat with her again in the corner of the living room, my coat still wrapped around her shoulders. Her breathing had steadied some, but her lips were still pale, her eyes glassy. I touched her hand. Dry, the kind of dryness that comes from more than just the cold. It was the kind of neglect that accumulates slowly, like dust in corners no one bothers to clean. I watched the firelight flicker across her face and wondered how long this had been going on. How many nights like this? How many forgotten meals? How many missed medications? My phone buzzed in my back pocket. I pulled it out and opened my banking app. In the quiet glow of the screen, I scrolled through a list of payments, each one marked, Home Support Transfer, Grandma. I'd sent money every month for the last 3 years, sometimes more when Mom hinted at doctor bills or heating oil shortages. I walked into the kitchen, careful not to make a sound. On the counter, a stack of mail leaned against the fruit bowl. Vera always kept the house looking staged, like a catalog shot, but bills still piled up in corners like everyone else's. I rifled through the stack. Electric, credit card, a refund check from a spa downtown. Underneath, I found a folder marked Reimbursements. Inside were printed statements, handwritten notes in the margins, listing expenses allegedly covered by the money I sent. Whole Foods, designer coffee, a wine tasting event, salon appointments, manicure receipts, but no prescriptions, no co-pays, no heating bills, no oxygen refills, no walker repairs, nothing with Grandma's name on it. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the folder until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't care. It was theft disguised as sacrifice. I took the folder with me back into the living room, but I didn't stop there. Something inside me knew. This wasn't the only thing they'd hidden. I turned toward the TV console. Below the screen was a cabinet filled with board games, family albums, and a box labeled holiday cards. I crouched and opened it. Among the half-used gift tags and cheap glittery bows, I found a thin envelope tucked between 2 rolls of tape. My name was written on the front, in the unmistakable, trembling script of someone whose hand had long forgotten steadiness. Althea. I stared at it for a second before opening it. Inside was a card. Nothing fancy. A basic store-bought design, snowflakes curling around a fireplace. The message inside read, "Thank you for the scarf, sweetheart. It's beautiful. I wear it around the house and think of you. I love you, always. You're the only one who truly sees me." The date? Last year. It had never been delivered. They kept it from me, like they kept everything. I felt heat rise in my chest, but it wasn't the fireplace. It was betrayal in its most complete form, not the kind that screamed, the kind that whispered over and over, "You don't matter." I walked back into the living room and dropped the folder and the card on the coffee table with more force than I meant to. Everyone looked up. "This," I said, pointing to the statements, "is what I paid for." Then I held up the card. "And this is what you hid." No one moved. No one even breathed. Gideon shifted in his seat, legs crossed the other way. Callista sipped from her glass again, not looking at me. Dad stared at the flames, and Vera just tilted her head, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "You don't understand the burden I carry," she said. The words floated out like incense, meant to soothe. Instead, they struck like ice. "It was never yours to carry," I replied. "You just took it." She blinked, slowly. "We tried. We really did." "No," I said. "You pretended. You pretended long enough to collect the checks and throw parties that made people think you were saints." I turned toward the others. "You all saw it. You all knew." Dad looked at me like I'd just slapped him. Callista leaned forward. "So what? You want us to say sorry? You want a medal?" I stared at her. "No. I want you to feel what it's like to be ignored, erased, lied to." She scoffed. "You think you're so noble, swooping in here after years away." "I didn't go away," I snapped. "I was deployed, then working, then sending money to take care of her. And you let her rot in the cold like it was nothing." Vera stood. "Althea, this is our home." "It's her home too," I said. And then I looked each one of them in the eye. "If you don't stop this, if you keep pretending none of this happened, the law gets involved." Vera narrowed her gaze. "You wouldn't do that to your own mother." I stepped closer. "Watch me." The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't defensive. It was fearful. I turned toward the side table where my badge sat, next to the keys to my cruiser. I picked it up and snapped it onto my belt. Then I looked back at them, calm as ever. This is no longer a family issue. This is elder abuse. No one followed me as I walked into the foyer. The weight of the badge on my belt felt heavier than usual, but not in a way that dragged me down. It grounded me, like it had found its rightful place. My fingers dialed the number without hesitation. The chill in the air had started creeping in again through the thin front windows, but I didn't flinch. "Adult Protective Services, emergency line," came the voice on the other end. "Yes," I said, steady. "I need to report a case of elder neglect. Immediate concern for safety. This is the granddaughter calling." A pause, then a clipped, businesslike tone. "Is the victim in physical danger right now?" She was left outside in below-freezing temperatures. No coat, no blanket, no assistance. I have photographic evidence, and she's now inside, in a hypothermic state. Breathing is shallow, skin pale. We've stabilized her, but... I glanced down the hallway, where Grandma sat near the fire, eyes closed but still breathing softly. "She's not safe here." The woman on the line asked for the address. I gave it without looking. I'd known it by heart since I was 8. "We'll assign a field caseworker within 48 hours, the voice replied. "In the meantime, remove her from the home if you believe she's at further risk. Do you have legal authority or emergency custody?" "I'm a police lieutenant," I said, already pulling my ID from my wallet and laying it on the console table. "And I have probable cause." Click. Confirmation email sent, reference number stored. I returned to the living room slowly, letting my footsteps announce me before I said a word. Gideon was sitting stiffly on the couch, arms crossed like he was trying not to fall apart. Callista had retreated to the kitchen, probably sipping something stronger than wine. Vera was pacing in front of the fireplace now, her usual mask slipping. "You're doing this on Christmas Eve?" she asked, voice rising. "In front of everyone?" "No," I replied evenly. "You did this on Christmas Eve. I'm just the one holding up the mirror." Vera's mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned back toward the others. "It's done. APS has been notified. The report's filed." Then I said the 6 words I hadn't planned on saying until it was too late to stop. "She's safe. Elder abuse report filed." You'd have thought I dropped a grenade in the center of the room. Callista gasped audibly from the kitchen, glass clinking against marble. Gideon sat up straighter, his eyes darting between us like he wanted to flee but couldn't find the strength. Vera went completely still. They looked at me like I'd committed some kind of treason. "You're actually going through with this?" she asked. "I already did." Her face drained of color. Her lips moved like she was trying to say something, but nothing came out. I walked to the dining table, pulled out my phone again, and opened my evidence folder. Photos of Grandma on the porch, screenshots of the weather, a video I'd taken when I wrapped her in my jacket, her breath barely visible in the cold air. "I've got everything," I said. "Even this." I held up a scan of the unopened scarf gift, complete with timestamp from last year. And a letter she wrote me that you never gave me. "I've documented the financial trail too, every wire transfer labeled for Grandma's care, and every corresponding expense you used it on." I laid it all out on the table, each piece like a quiet indictment, receipts, printouts, screenshots, dates. The story didn't need embellishment. The facts did the damage on their own. "They'll be here soon," I added. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. But they're coming." "You've humiliated us," Vera said, finally breaking her silence. "No," I said. "You did that all by yourselves." Callista reappeared in the doorway, face flushed. "You always had a flair for drama. I swear, sometimes I think we should have left you in that army base." That one almost got to me. I swallowed it, looked her dead in the eye. "And yet here I am, and you're still hiding behind brunch mimosas and matching sweaters." Gideon stood then. "Look, this is getting out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated. "Your mother nearly froze to death, and you're worried about optics?" His jaw clenched. "That's not what I meant." "But it's exactly what you said." The room pulsed with something raw, rage, guilt, fear. I couldn't even separate them anymore, and I didn't want to. I turned my attention to the only person in the room who mattered right now. Grandma. She was watching me from the armchair, her face softer now. She didn't look angry, she looked tired, but there was something else there too. A flicker of relief, maybe. "You don't have to spend another night in this house again," I told her. I walked over, bent down carefully, and lifted her into my arms. Her body felt lighter than before. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe she'd just carried the weight of being forgotten for so long. And now, for once, someone was lifting it off her. As I turned to head toward the door, Dad stepped forward. "You're not taking her out like this." I didn't even raise my voice. "One more word," I said, "and I'll file an obstruction charge too." He froze mid-step. For a second, I thought he might argue, but then he looked at the badge clipped to my hip and the woman in my arms. He stepped back. I walked out of the house. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling the chaos inside. Outside, it was quiet. Peaceful in a way the warmth of that house could never offer. The snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes settling on Grandma's scarf. I adjusted it around her, kissed the top of her head. "They'll say I destroyed this family," I whispered. And just before I reached the car, I heard Vera's voice from inside, low and sharp, like a wound being reopened. "She'll destroy us." I didn't look back. I didn't have to, because I already knew the truth. "No," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "You already did." The next morning came in quietly. No dramatic sunrise, no poetic snowfall. Just a gray sky and a calm so heavy it could crack glass. I sat in the wellness room at the precinct, sipping a cup of lukewarm coffee, watching Grandma rest on the cot beside me. They'd set it up for her the night before, clean sheets and all, in a room usually used for officers recovering from long shifts or minor injuries. She looked better already, still frail, but warmer. Her fingers had regained color, her breathing, steady. She'd barely said a word since I carried her out of that house, but she didn't have to. Her silence wasn't resignation, it was relief. Someone knocked gently on the doorframe. I looked up. Malik stepped in, holding 2 steaming paper cups. "Fresh pot," he said, nodding toward my half-empty mug. "Figured you might need a refill." I took it, grateful. "Thanks." He leaned against the wall. "They're already spiraling, you know." I arched an eyebrow. "Spiraling how?" He took a sip. One of the patrol guys said your mom's been calling around. Left messages with the captain, the mayor's office, even her cousin on the city council. She's throwing everything at the wall. I didn't even flinch. Let her. He smiled. You're stone cold. No, I said, sipping my coffee. I'm just done pretending. We sat in silence for a beat. He handed me a file folder. What's this? I asked. Ran a few checks like you asked. You were right to be suspicious. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of public records, tax forms, a few notes from financial institutions. 3 years, Malik said. She listed your grandmother as a dependent, claimed elder care credits, filed for refunds under a medical assistance clause. I skimmed the pages, heart thudding with each line. Thousands of dollars. And not one of them spent on actual care, he confirmed. At least not that we can trace. They weaponized her identity, I murmured. Malik nodded. Fraud. IRS will have a field day. I closed the folder gently, not out of hesitation, but to keep the rage from rising too fast. This wasn't just emotional neglect. This was calculated exploitation. Before I could say more, there was another knock. This time softer. Beatrice Langford stood in the doorway, holding a tin of cookies in her gloved hands. She wore her usual quilted coat and a pair of thick fur-lined boots. Her silver hair was tucked beneath a red wool hat. I don't mean to intrude, she said gently. Just wanted to drop these off for you both. I stood. Come in, Bea. She walked in slowly, placing the tin on the table. I heard about what happened, she said. The porch, the cold, and I just wanted to say something. I nodded for her to continue. I've lived across the street for over 20 years. Seen a lot come and go in that house, she said. Saw your grandma sitting out there most evenings. Thought it was her choice, a bit of fresh air. She paused. But then it snowed, and she was still out there. Sometimes for hours. No blanket. Just sitting. I thought about calling someone. But I told myself it wasn't my place. It is now, I said. She looked at me with glassy eyes. I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. You're speaking up now, I said. And I'll be including your statement in the report. Bea nodded, stepped closer to Grandma and whispered, You deserved better. As she left, the room grew still again. I pulled out my phone and finished uploading everything. Photos, the scarf, the unopened card, the tax documents. Then I wrote a detailed summary and submitted the final report to APS. It was no longer a conversation. It was a case file. Around noon, an officer from the front desk poked his head in. Hey, Althea, your mom's been calling non-stop. Says it's urgent. I didn't even look up from my notes. Tell her I'm unavailable. He nodded and disappeared down the hallway. I heard her voicemail later anyway. Through the speaker, her voice trembled. You've made your point. We get it. But please, don't let this go any further. This is our name you're dragging through the mud. You're my daughter. I raised you better than this. I let the message play through without a word, then hit delete. That night, I sat at the kitchen table in the precinct break room, scrolling through my phone. Grandma was asleep on the cot again, warm under a thick wool blanket an officer had brought in. On social media, Vera's profile had gone dark. No holiday photos, no updates. But her name was still there, tagged. What happened at Vera's party? Is it true she left her mother outside? She always was good at hiding things behind her pearls. The comments were piling up. I didn't engage. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't need a spotlight. It burns on its own. I logged off, closed my laptop, and leaned back in my chair. Malik walked in just as I drained the last of my coffee. APS scheduled the inspection, he said. I sat up. When? Tomorrow morning. Unannounced. I nodded, calm settling over me like armor. This could be it, he added, watching me closely. I stood, stretched my back, and glanced over at Grandma. Let them face what they built, I said. By the time the inspection team arrived, I'd already been up for hours. I didn't need to be there. That's what Malik said anyway. APS had everything they needed, documents, photos, statements, recordings, but staying behind at the precinct felt like letting go too soon. I needed to see it through, even if only from a distance. The message came in via internal comms. Malik popped his head into the wellness room where Grandma was still sleeping. "They're at the house," he said, voice low. "3 agents." "Unannounced, just like they said." I nodded. "Anything yet?" He glanced at his phone. "They've already found the broken latch on the window in her room. No visible heat source either. That space heater you mentioned, not plugged in, covered in dust." My jaw tightened. "They'll find more." "They're walking the house now, taking photos. One of them asked about stockings on the mantel." That caught my attention. "No stocking for her?" the agent had apparently asked. Of course there wasn't. I pictured it. The living room as pristine as always, the stockings embroidered with names. Dad, Vera, Callista, Gideon, even the damn dog. But not Grandma. Her absence wasn't just physical anymore. It was scripted, edited out like an unwanted line in a play. I didn't respond. Malik added, "They're cataloging everything. No medical supplies, no receipts, just wine bottles and holiday decor." I let out a slow breath, not from relief, just release. It had begun. By mid-afternoon, the first cracks in the public facade started showing. Malik walked past the squad room with a grin and a raised brow. "You seen this yet?" He handed me his phone. On it was a screenshot, Vera's name trending in a local Facebook group. I tapped into the post, a screenshot from her Christmas party. The caption, "This was the night." Another comment underneath, "They say she left her elderly mother on the porch, in freezing weather." My stomach turned, but not from guilt, from something closer to justice, not vengeance, not vindictiveness, just the relief of the truth finally standing on its own legs. An hour later, it got worse for them. A press release from the Women's Heritage League landed in my inbox. Vera had been removed from her position, effective immediately. "We do not condone neglect, abuse, or image manipulation under the guise of family care." It was signed by every board member, including the woman she used to have coffee with every Wednesday. I didn't smile, but something inside me settled, like a weight I hadn't noticed was gone. That evening, I sat across from Grandma in the small kitchen of our rented house. The place wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a heater that groaned when it turned on, but it was warm. It was ours. I made cocoa and poured 2 mugs. She added a little extra sugar to hers like she always had, and we sat in silence. It wasn't awkward, it was peace. She looked up after a long sip and said, "You didn't just save me." I met her gaze. "You freed me." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because for once, there was nothing to prove. Later that night, I got a county alert on my phone. My breath caught when I read it. The house, my childhood home, was being seized. Foreclosure initiated due to improper use of dependent status on federal returns. Fraud. Ongoing APS investigation support. The home they pushed me out of had finally collapsed under its own weight. I stared at the screen for a while. Not satisfied. Not even happy. Just done. The house was gone. The illusion crumbled. I didn't tell Grandma, not yet. She didn't need that tonight. But Callista found a way to let me know she'd heard. A text came in just before midnight. "You ruined us." I stared at it for a minute, then typed, "You did that when you erased her." No response. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. "Vera." I stared at the screen, then picked up. "She doesn't want to talk to you," I said calmly. "Not tonight. Maybe not ever." There was a pause. "She's my mother." "She was your responsibility," I replied. "You forfeited the rest." Then I hung up. I checked on Grandma once more before heading to bed. She was asleep, her breathing calm, the scarf I'd given her folded neatly beside her on the nightstand. I sat for a while at the edge of her bed, watching her sleep, remembering all the nights she used to sit beside me when the thunder got too loud. Back when she was the fortress. Back when I didn't know I'd have to become one for her. I reached into the drawer next to her bed, needing something to do with my hands, and found a folded piece of paper. Old, worn, familiar. It was the drawing I'd made when I was a kid. The one she kept. A little house with a garden. Two stick figures, her and me, smiling on a porch with a sign above that read, "No one gets left out here." I swallowed against the lump in my throat, ran my thumb over the words, then whispered so only the night could hear. "We're almost there, Grandma." I tucked the drawing back into the drawer, careful not to crease its old, fragile edges. The lines were faint now, and the color pencil I'd used back then had bled slightly through the paper over the years, but the words were still clear, still legible, still everything. No one gets left out here. I stood up and moved quietly through the small rental house. The place wasn't fancy, no granite countertops or walk-in closets. The heater clanged a little too loudly when it kicked in, but it was warm and safe and ours. In the kitchen, I poured a cup of coffee, letting the silence settle around me like a second skin. Grandma was still sleeping in her chair by the window, wrapped in the scarf I'd given her all those months ago. The same scarf she never got to open until I found it shoved in a drawer, still wrapped, still sealed. I didn't wear my badge anymore, not unless I was on shift, and these days I picked up shifts only when I had to. It wasn't that I didn't care about the job, I did, but after what happened, I needed space from everything. I kept the badge in a drawer by the front door now, along with the spare keys, a flashlight, and a folded-up copy of the APS report that started it all. Grandma stirred. I walked over and sat beside her on the small love seat. "You sleep okay?" I asked, voice low. She smiled, like a stone. I nodded, sipping my coffee. "Good." She looked out the window for a long moment before speaking again. "You know, I never thought I'd live long enough to be seen again." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure I could. "You were never invisible," I said finally. "They just chose not to look." She reached for my hand, her fingers still thinner than they used to be, but stronger than I remembered. "You broke the chain, Althea." I didn't cry. I'd done all my crying in the quiet hours, when no one was looking. That afternoon, I walked down to the corner market for milk and bread. The cashier, a teenager named Kyle, gave me a soft smile. "Hey, Miss Rowan." "Hi, Kyle." No questions. No whispers, just respect, maybe a little fear, but mostly a kind of quiet acknowledgement, the kind you earn, not demand. The news had started dying down. Most people had moved on. But the story lingered in the air like the afterburn of a candle long extinguished. People still talked, just not to my face. I heard the comments at the diner. "That's the daughter who filed on her own mother." Or at the pharmacy. "That family on Maple Street. You wouldn't believe what they did to the old lady." But for the first time in my life, those words didn't feel like wounds. They felt like air clearing. Callista had moved. Somewhere out of state. I never asked where. Gideon shut down his social media after the foreclosure notice was made public. And Vera hadn't shown her face at church or any of the town events in weeks. Last I heard, she'd resigned from every board she sat on and stopped answering her phone. They weren't villains. Not in the way the world paints them in black and white. They were just people who thought silence would keep their secrets safe. They were wrong. One night, a week after the final APS hearing confirmed everything I'd reported, Grandma and I sat on the porch. Not the one from that old house, but this one, ours. It was smaller, and the railing creaked, and the porch light buzzed when it got cold. But it was home. She rocked slowly in the chair we found at a garage sale. I sat next to her with a blanket around my shoulders, a cup of tea in my hands. "You proud of what you did?" she asked, eyes on the stars. I took a while to answer. "I don't feel proud," I said honestly. "I just feel hollow." She nodded, as if she'd expected that. "Justice isn't meant to fill you, honey. It's meant to free you." We sat for a while longer, the night air cool but not biting. "I still think about them," I admitted. Not out of regret. Just memory. "That's what happens when you stop pretending," she said gently. "You start remembering clearly." I smiled a little. "Does it ever stop hurting?" She looked at me. "No. But you learn to live in the space beyond it." She dozed off a little while later, I stayed outside. The snow had started to fall again, soft and slow. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and walked to the edge of the porch. Our little home glowed from within. Not in the way magazine houses did, but in a quieter, steadier way. Inside, the framed drawing hung in the hallway, the one I'd made as a child, the house, the swing, the chairs, and the words in shaky crayon, "No one gets left out here." I looked up at the night sky, the flakes landing gently on my eyelashes, and for the first time in a long time, I whispered it aloud, without pain, without bitterness. She's safe. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause, it comes with quiet choices, made in rooms no one sees. This wasn't about revenge, it was about drawing the line between love and enabling, between tradition and truth. So let me ask you, have you ever stood up to your own family? Not out of anger, but out of love for someone they refuse to see. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your stories. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories. You never know. The next one might sound a little like your own.